The NewsX and Business World special show on the Indian economy. Joining us, a power pack panel as always. We have Varun Khurana, founder OTIPY, joining us live. Ankit Sukha, CEO ICAE Edu Skills, is joining us live as well. Dr. Vidur Mahajan, Head of Research and Development, Center for Advanced Research in Imaging, Neurosciences and Genomics, is joining us live as well. Dr. Vishnu Bhasin, Managing Director, Dr. P. Bhasin Path Labs, is with us as well. And Anurag Batra, Chairman and Editor-in-Chief of Business World, is joining us on the broadcast as well. Welcome all of you to NewsX and Business World special show. Thank you for being with us. Varun Khurana, let me begin with you first. Now, you are of course an entrepreneur. As an entrepreneur, how have you attempted to stay resilient in these tough times?
Thank you. Thank you for having me. So I think, these times are obviously tough in the sense that, with the whole COVID scare and especially given the fact that, this has had impact, in terms of produce movement. There have been times when even the mandi system and the wholesale markets have, seen a lot of, I would say, less inwarding of produce, primarily because of the fact that, this whole COVID scare and people not wanting to, come together and just the whole scare around it. So I think for us, what has kept us going is that, we took this on upon ourselves as an opportunity. So just to, give you a brief, we run a farm to fork supply chain for fresh fruits and vegetables through a unique reseller-based model that makes sure that between the farm and the fork, we are able to move fresh fruits and vegetables in as little as 12 hours to make sure that what people get is as fresh as possible and with as maximum of a nutrition as possible. So for us, this was a unique opportunity where we felt that while existing systems are not able to keep up with the environment, we took it upon ourselves as a challenge. Our teams have been working throughout this period. Whether there was lockdown or whether there was no lockdown, we tried to leverage this opportunity to the maximum. Being in the essential services category, we also got support from the government to allow us to continue operations. And throughout this period, like I said, we took it upon ourselves as a challenge to make sure that we are able to serve essentials to people when even the existing mandi system, saw disruptions.
Okay. Dr. Batra?
Thank you so much. Again, it is very topical. Today we're talking about the farm sector, which you represent. You rightly talked about, from farm to fork, and with the single market, the government tried to create a positive impetus. But the last 2 weeks have been dominated by what's happening in terms of the farmers, in some way giving a pushback to the government in terms of the new farm laws. What is your personal view on what is right and what needs to be changed?
Sure. So, Anurag, see, the way, we see things is that, the government is basically trying to make things, I would say, relatively more open. So, overall, if you look at, the new farm laws, what we have done is made it, give additional opportunities for farmers to sell produce, outside of the mandi. So you're not necessarily dependent on the APMCs only. So I think from that perspective, it opens up options. Farmers have additional opportunities which they would have not maybe explored had these things not come about. So I think overall the direction of a free market where we give more options to farmers, I think is the direction fundamentally is right. From a farmer's perspective, the other part of it, and which is why we see all of these these protests, is because when it comes to that, obviously, there are a lot of farmers, in India who rely on growing produce, which sell at a minimum support price. Now, we work on perishables, which is, fruits and vegetables, which usually don't have a minimum support price. But if you talk about all the cereals and grains, they do have a support price, which makes sure that, farmers get a minimum due for their produce. Now, from a government perspective, the move is towards, I would say, a freer market. But from a farmer's perspective, the worry is that if it moves in that direction, and let's say, the support prices in general are removed, in the times to come, then, how do they make sure that they get the minimum income that, they otherwise have been getting for the produce that they are growing? So overall, I think, that is the general fear. We see that more in the farmers of the north, because there, the farmers rely more on these support prices based crops. So overall, I would say, the fear is not unfounded. I think there is a middle ground that needs to, happen somehow, so that, fundamentally we are moving towards a direction where everyone has more opportunities, but at the same time, the immediate interests of the farmers are also not jeopardized. So I think,
There's
there's a
the
middle
old
ground.
saying, Varun, that if you want to feed someone and you want to make sure his or her 7 generations are fed, you don't, fish for them. You teach them how to fish. In some way, the government is saying, go out, we'll help you market your products. We possibly will help you in certain categories, get you better than MSP, and, also move towards a market-friendly regime and also upgrade in terms of the kind of crops we do. Because, there are higher yield crops, which can mean a better deal for the farmers. Ankit, you come from the edutech domain. The edutech domain has seen an explosion in the last 8 months. But there's too much of competition, there's too much of clutter, there's too much of Me Too products and services. Tell us, how have you pivoted in the last 8 months in your business, and how do you see the next few months?
Well, education has definitely seen a lot of change, and what this one COVID has definitely done, it has helped people leapfrog technology. People have started adopting technology like never before. They have been more comfortable with online meetings, with Zoom calls. People have started questioning their need to travel, and now definitely education is also making its mark on the e-domain. What I see is that it's here to stay, and this change is permanent and for good. However, you cannot take out the physical aspect out of education. You cannot expect your child or your students to be groomed in an online fashion or only, like where it's going through. People are now, if you say coding, who needs to learn coding at class, like at the age of 6 or at class 6 or 8? You don't need that. You need to learn life skills, life values, which can only be learned in a peer environment. And these few things which are right now marketed in a way that you're gonna miss the bus, the fear of missing out, as we call it, is being propagated. And I don't see a bright future for it. It's a short-term game. However, yes, technology is going to take over. Technology
and
is...
Ankit, just to build what you're saying, you said technology is going to take over. As per current estimates, and these estimates can be accelerated, the world will see singularity in 2034, which means the machines will think as smartly as the human being and perform a lot of jobs and functions that we do as intelligent human beings. So clearly, technology adoption and technology skills have given way to new jobs and also made some jobs irrelevant. So that fear is not unfounded.
Absolutely, absolutely. Like, you could not have spoken better. So here, to add on, with every new technology that comes, a new 1,000 new doors open up. 1,000 new doors open up. When Amazon, Flipkart came, people thought that, Kirana stores will be a thing of the past. People will not be able to survive. But what eventually happened, you see, lakhs and lakhs of jobs were created in warehousing, in supply chains, and so much money comes around it. So this is the same which is going to happen here also. Jobs are going to increase. Obviously, redundancy is going to go.
What I would like to know is, Ankit, again, a lot of large players in edutech are funded. They've sought external funding. Just to give our viewers a sense, almost $2.2 billion funding has come in the last 14 months in the education and education tech domain. So clearly, there is a lot of investor interest. But at the same time, everyone is chasing market growth. They're not necessarily chasing profitability and adoption in a deep way. What is your comment there?
Well, this is the time to go towards the market, because this is a segment unexplored, and the first mover definitely has an advantage. So I definitely see nothing wrong in the strategy. People are trying to grab a portion of the market. They want to be the synonyms, like what Xerox is to the photocopy industry. They're trying to be synonyms and acronyms for the education industry. So that's a strategy that can work, may not work. I always believe in numbers, and I believe profit should drive valuations and not
I agree with you.
share.
I agree with you. For the first time, entrepreneurs across sectors believe that costs have to be lesser than revenues. It sounds very basic, but the equation wasn't true before COVID. Now let me go to
question for you on digital learning, because we've seen, of course, a growth of digital learning, particularly this year. Do you believe this is a trend that's here to stay even when physical learning resumes and schools and colleges open up? Do you believe e-learning, digital learning, e-tech companies, platforms are here to stay?
They're here to stay, but they're not going to replace physical learning. Never. That's not going to happen, because pure learning, we are humans, and as humans we need humans to live with. So that's going to complement, that's going to facilitate, that's going to help it grow. But it cannot replace human learning. It cannot replace the physical learning as we traditionally know it in the schools and colleges. Definitely schools and colleges will start teaching in a different way. Students who have missed out can they can learn concepts better. They can reschedule their timings and go to classes they did not otherwise have time to go to. They can explore more. But this is going to be complementing. People who have the notion that this is going to replace this industry altogether, I believe their notion is misfounded.
I totally agree. At best, when it comes to continuous upgradation of knowledge for working professionals, you could say that maybe digital may be a way to add layers. But for somebody who is in undergrad or postgrad or is in the foundation years of his or her education, to expect them to just have digital learning and then become complete professionals or human beings that have life skills possibly won't happen, at least over the next year. Now, this pandemic started as a healthcare issue. Over a period of time, it became a business issue, an economic issue. Lives issue turned into a livelihood issue. So let me bring in two specialists from the healthcare domain. We have Dr. Vidur Mahajan and we have Dr. Vishu Bhasin. Let me first bring you Dr. Mahajan. Dr. Mahajan, for the first 4 to 6 months of the COVID, onslaught, the health centers, hospitals, diagnostic chains, apart from COVID testing, didn't see too much of patients because there was a fear of going out. There was a double fear of visiting a hospital. Tell me, the FICCI estimates for loss of business to the healthcare industry are more than $2.2 billion. Has some of that business returned? And if you were at say 100 rupees of revenue in March, where are you in November?
At the outset, Anurag, thank you so much for having me here. Been an ardent follower of your show, and it's an honor to, now participate in it. I think, if you were to trace a graph, right, of the number of cases in Delhi, and overlay another graph on it on general, healthcare services revenue, non-COVID healthcare services revenue, you would realize that, Delhi has gone through 3 peaks of COVID, and every time there's a peak, healthcare revenue falls. And the rationale is very simple. Of course, initial 3-4 months, the entire world was down by great margins, and nobody was really, not even in COVID related services were people making any revenue whatsoever. But even now, as Delhi is kind of exiting this third wave, thanks to the great efforts of the Delhi government, as Delhi is exiting this third wave, we are seeing revenues come back. But then, as Varun also alluded to it in the beginning, there is so much fear, and it's right. It's true fear, right? Nobody wants to go to a hospital for a backache, which you can maybe bear for, 2-3 days, at the risk of contracting COVID. So to answer your question very specifically, if we were at 100 rupees pre-COVID, today we would be between 60 and 80. And it's an oscillating figure depending on, how the number of cases increase.
And again, Dr. Mahajan, in the healthcare segment, healthcare at home in every, not just in the COVID segment, but I'm talking of healthcare for elders, healthcare for home, as a category has grown. Tell us, you're in the imaging business, you're the leading players, you're pioneers in this domain, you're a trusted name. Tell us, do we see, because imaging needs sophisticated gadgets, large machines. But at some stage, do you see the gadget would be so sophisticated that you don't have to come to an imaging clinic, but the imaging clinic comes to your home and kind of does diagnosis?
Yeah, no, in fact, Anurag, one of the things that I run is our research center, which is called CARING, the Center for Advanced Research in Imaging, Neurosciences and Genomics, where we are actively evaluating such technologies where literally, you can have an X-ray machine that is smaller than a small briefcase, and it can go to people's homes. You can do AI-enabled X-rays inside their homes and immediately, also diagnose disease. The challenge with that is, number one, cost. Miniaturization has an inherent cost to it, and there is also a little bit of a quality trade-off. But we are expecting in the next 3 to 6 months, there should be home X-rays should become much more prevalent than what they are today. On the other hand, there is the ultrasound, right? The ultrasound machine, I'm sure many of the viewers might already know, there is this amazing device called the Butterfly IQ, which is literally a handheld ultrasound machine. You can hook it up to your phone and take it literally with you in your pocket. Unfortunately, in India, regulation prevents the use of ultrasound in such ways, where you cannot take an ultrasound machine outside of a healthcare facility to a patient's home or even in a vehicle and take it from point A to point B because regulation is such, and it's called the PNDT Act that prohibits this from happening. But yes, the
Because
future is.
Just my assumption is that possibly it was being used to do sex determination of
Correct,
a child,
correct,
and that's why the law was brought in, and
Yes.
in some way the government wants to prevent the misuse of that.
Correct,
So the policy is made for stoppage of misuse rather than enablement sometimes.
Of course.
So clearly I think the policy needs to keep in sync. Let me bring in Dr. Vishu Bhasin into focus. Dr. Bhasin, you and your diagnostics chain, again, a very preeminent one, trusted one, has been at the forefront of doing private testing in COVID. Have you seen in the last 30 days, I know the price point of COVID, I know when my father fell and I had to get a COVID test done, and I remember I got it done at about 4,500 rupees, and then it became 2,400 rupees, and I got a COVID test done today because I'm traveling tomorrow from your lab, Dr. Bhasin, and,
Yes, sir.
And it is 800 rupees now, right?
Yes.
So clearly, have you seen the number of people who are getting tested privately going up? And if yes, give us a sense and tell us, how has your business done? I know you don't see your business as just a business, you see it as a service, but give us a sense of where is the testing business, the diagnostic business headed?
Sure, sir. Good evening, sir. So let me first address the agenda of pricing, which you said that I remember when you paid 4,500, then a subsequent time I only charged you 2,400, and today only I charge you 800. Now all these pricings were instructions from the government from day one. Now these depend upon factors of the costing at which we are procuring our reagents. At 4,500, the biggest challenge was all the reagents at that time were imported. But when Indian manufacturing scaled up, when Atmanirbhar Bharat was taking some shape and the reagent costings came down, so the government changed it to 2,400. Now they have brought it down to 800, which is actually a very constricting figure, and the testing numbers are more or less the same. If I am looking at the numbers which were done on 25th of November or the demand, it is still the same today. The only difference in Delhi, because there is two different pricing slabs, 800 for center visit and 1,200 for home visit. So there has been a paradigm shift. Prior to this order, everybody wanted us to come down to their house and do COVID testing. And people, no matter how urgent it was for them, they were very scared to come to our dedicated COVID testing centers, drive-through centers, which had all the precautions available. But now, to save that 400 rupees, everybody wants to come to the center. So the net number of tests being conducted by us are the same. There is no upscale. There is a slight difference because of the travel demand, the domestic travel, as for which you got tested today. But net is the same. Now, talking about how it's impacting the industry, this price move, it is basically going to stop the the incremental capacity of COVID testing. Now, if you look at it, currently in India we are doing 1.1 million tests a day, and Delhi is doing about 40,000 tests a day. This has happened because on 23rd March, when there was a government allowed private testing, there are hardly about 60 to 80 labs in India who could do it. As of now, there are 1,019 labs in India which are doing. But this entire big shift and the response from the industry towards the duty which was called for will stop because of missing financial viability towards the investment. So let's see, but I hope that we don't even need more capacity to come in, and we control the disease more and more better so that less people need testing. That would be a better situation for the society, I feel.
Okay, I do.
The 3 T's at the start: testing, tracing, and treatment.
Yes.
I think we are praying to God for a miracle. Hopefully the vaccine is around the corner. Hopefully the vaccine is more effective than it has come across till now. So, we all live on hope, and miracles do happen. And I keep saying hope is not a plan, but there have been lots of professionals and institutions working along with the government to be able to bring vaccine. And dare I say, some people have become more disciplined in India, and wearing a mask, keeping, distancing, and doing, sanitization of your hand and everything that you have has become a habit. So hopefully, if that habit inducement continues, we may prevent the spread.
Dr. Bhasin, coming back across to you, a very important point, an interesting point was being raised by Dr. Batra as far as the test pricing was concerned. Now the focus shifting on the vaccine. There's a big question on pricing of the vaccine as well. And I know, of course, it's not your immediate expertise or your lab's immediate expertise, but still, since you are in this healthcare space, I would like your perspective on this. There is going to be discrepancy in pricing at first, between vaccines and between companies and between various parts of the country. Do you believe in due course the government must step in and standardize that pricing as well for different vaccines? The test prices were astronomical earlier, as Dr. Batra himself quoted, and what they are today, we all know. As far as the vaccine prices are concerned as well, do you believe the government should step in to ensure standardization as early as possible?
Sir, I think that the government from day one should have a standardized pricing for vaccine like they had for testing. Like in testing, the pricing was always fixed by the government, never defined by the labs, whether they were 4,500 or 800. Likewise, the vaccine should also be price controlled as it is a need of the hour. And in addition to being controlling the pricing, the supply chain control and being delivered to the people who need it first is of equal importance than just the pricing. So we don't want that it should only go to the rich, which is a new, a fear a lot of people are saying. But the pricing has to be balanced, and the distribution also has to be balanced and fixed by the government from day one.
Okay, Dr. Batra. Vidur.
We already have a price control regime for drugs in place, like for coronary stents, for orthopedic implants and medicines like say hydroxychloroquine, which was a big topic for discussion, was a price control drug. So we have a drug price control regime in our country already, and it should be done under that.
Okay, let's go across to Dr. Mahajan. He's also in the same sector. Yes, Dr. Mahajan, please weigh in.
No, I was just saying that the interesting thing about anything related to COVID is that on the surface it seems like you're providing a service, whether a test or a vaccine, to an individual, but you're in reality affecting that individual's entire contact area. So by that sense, it is a public health decision, and it is a public health good, which is this vaccine. So it would always be critical for the government to step in and decide a fair price. Again, keeping all sorts of incentives and quality structures in place, because we are seeing different types of vaccines, different types of performance, and different types of regimes of vaccine administration. So it's certainly a public health good. And hence, would have to fall under the domain of the government. Now, which government, what structure, what level,
yes,
that remains to be seen.
Yeah, center and states can also differ. Okay, let's open it up to some larger questions now with Dr. Batra. Dr. Batra.
Thank you, Uday. Always a pleasure to host the show with you. The only reason I'm on the show with these 5 handsome men is to balance out the looks and brains that these gentlemen have. I have no hair, no looks, no brains, so clearly I try to.
But all the expertise, let me add.
Thank you so much.
Yes.
Uday, I used to say this when I was younger, that God made 2 kinds of people. To some he gave hair, to others he gave brain. And people like me, no hair, no brain. And people like Uday, both hair and brain. But
Thank you. Yes.
To the entrepreneurs on the panel, Vidur, Ankit, Varun and Vishu, as entrepreneurs, you were living in a pre-COVID world. We're in a COVID or a post-COVID world, hopefully post-COVID soon, in the way that COVID fades away. Tell us, what are your top lockdown lessons? What is it that as an entrepreneur you feel that has changed in you or got added to your thought process that will hold you in good stead throughout your kind of journey in life? Let me start this time with Dr. Vishu Bhasin and then go around the house. Dr. Bhasin, what is it that has changed about your thinking in the last 8 months?
See, the most important thing we've learned is to keep the overheads to as low as possible, have only logical expenses to take care of, and most important thing which we have learned is how to scale our operations rapidly overnight. Because our industry, we were asked to, one day the government gives an order that from tomorrow we need testing to be double. So that means we have to work double. So thrice this order has come. So from our capacity at 1, we've gone to the power 6 already. So scaling up overnight or in a period of 48 to 72 hours is what our biggest lesson from the lockdown and COVID has been. With keeping the quality at the same place, which has been a far bigger challenge.
Okay, that's good. And if I may have to ask you, Dr. Bhasin, the government has been in the play, being responsive, bringing in what measure. I mean, I was watching CNN last night, and there are food riots in the US. In India, to Indian government's credit, there has been no riots. There have been no riots around food. The social, unrest is zero or close to zero. Clearly, we don't give the government that much credit for it does right. We're always looking at what it hasn't done right, which may be very small. But tell us, what's your sense of, has the kind of package that the government came out worked for entrepreneurs? Have you seen people around you benefiting from it? And what do you think the government can do more, Dr. Bhasin?
See, I think the only thing in the government package which I saw my colleagues or friends benefit from was the moratorium on the loan. Other than that, most of the features in the packages were not much of use to medium size or little big industries. They were not much of use. But the moratorium was surely helpful.
Okay. Dr. Vidur Mahajan, what are your top lockdown lessons?
So my, the number one thing that the lockdown actually taught us and continues to teach even till today is to build your organization for flexibility and agility, right? So, basically we were not a, pathology player by far. We had a genomics lab which was extremely sleepy in nature, very long, complicated scientific tests. And now here we are today, doing 1,000 tests a day. So it was only possible because of this flexibility mindset, right? Any process you're setting up, the only thing you're thinking is what happens if I have to, quadruple this tomorrow,
yeah,
right? And that, I think it involves a certain organization culture where every one of your managers, employees has a certain level of freedom to exercise their own thinking. So flexibility was the number one thing. Secondly, I learned that you should listen to friends. Effectively, the amount of advice we've relied on, the amount of goodwill, and because it's
saying
not
domain experts were friends.
Domain experts plus people who will not misguide you.
Yeah.
Right. There is always a certain set of people in life who who will go to any extent for you and your organization. So listen to those people. Don't dismiss them as you may have done in pre-COVID.
And I keep saying, Dr. Mahajan, two things: that the value of expertise and what you pay for that expertise is always cheaper than when you don't get that expertise. Because
Absolutely.
whether it's healthcare, whether it's financial advice, whether it's advice related to whatever technology, I mean,
Absolutely.
so really experts matter, and advice is always
The
good advice is
challenge, Anurag, was that during the lockdown and during COVID times, there were no experts. Right? We were all thinking this will finish in 8 weeks, this will finish in 12 weeks.
But I can tell you that also, because of COVID, we become more open. We are saying never say never. So I think as individuals, as entrepreneurs, we are more open-minded, where we're saying, let's look at it, as Dr. Bhasin rightly said, that we're focusing on essentials and necessities, and focusing on the right drivers of business, than just, kind of doing things that make us feel good. Ankit, what have been your top lockdown lessons?
Well, so a few of the points already covered. I would not repeat them. I'll just touch base upon them as rightly mentioned, our cost control and flexibility. However, one thing that this lockdown has taught us and reinforced is quality always wins. And this is something we were able to place most of our students. So I'm into skill development, vocational education, and we were able to place almost all of our students as soon as the lockdown ended. In fact, during the lockdown period, we placed over 500 students across the country. Number one. Number two, gig economy. We never actually used these temp workers or temp contractual staffing ever, and we never actually played with them, and we never experienced how this would work out. We always thought that if you need to grow, you need to have people with you for the long term. You never experimented with small projects. Now this one thing has changed for now, and definitely one thing which is a big change for me personally, now I can work from anywhere. I can work from the mountains, I can work from my home, I can work from a hotel or from a cafe. So this thing is definitely changed and here to
Work
stay.
from anywhere is enabling productivity, and that's, you're right, that what has mattered is this mindset of being open. That's one thing that's coming across in everybody's inputs. Varun, what are your top lockdown lessons?
Well, I'm just going to, repeat a few things which obviously, some of you have mentioned. So like Vidur was mentioning, I think, the number one thing that, we also learned is agility, right? Because see, and, this goes back to Darwin's theory that the species that, lasts the longest is the one that evolves the fastest. So I think, and that applies to businesses as much. So, the speed at which a business will or evolve during these times, are those businesses that have, really kind of, swept away and, kind of swept ahead out of a lot of, others. So I think that is, one learning, that be agile as a business. Along the way, one of the other things that also happened was that, so as a business, we were primarily a B2B company, right before, I would say, like up until the end of 2019, and we just started our consumer business through a reseller model. So we were barely doing like 200 orders a day, in the February time frame, and like now we're almost touching 4,000. So that has just grown immensely for us, and a lot of it has also happened through, I would say, women resellers who are on the platform now. That was something we never realized, that the whole women network would end up being so powerful for us.
Yes.
And it has,
I call them the homepreneurs.
Yeah. So that has been just been a big learning.
Okay.
It has been a huge learning. And
Okay.
Other than that, I should also add that along the way during the lockdown, we did get a lot of support from the government, the IPS officers, in terms of getting approvals to function and for people to move about. So
Yes.
I would say support from the government is also, especially
Okay.
the IPS.
So those have been some of the key lockdown lessons for our panel, and of course some of their takeaways, their trends that they've observed during this extremely unprecedented and difficult time. It's almost time up now for our special segment today, but it's time for the last round of questions, and let's do a bit of a rapid fire, Dr. Batra, because we've got less time and we want to get a last comment in from everyone on the panel. I think on what still they expect from the government. There have been a few rounds of stimulus announcements this year. There will be perhaps more next year. It's time for the budget as well in February. That's just about 6 weeks more to go. And also when our panelists believe the recovery will take place. So over to Dr. Batra for the last round today.
Yeah, you're right. The government has done 3 interventions. which is a combination of responding to the environment, in some way giving relief, and third is creating a revival through measures. It has also taken course correction in certain sectors, opened up and reformed those sectors like the mining sector, like the food and farm sector. But clearly, let's hear from the entrepreneurs what they think the government can do from here on. Build on the good work it's done, and what it can do from a macro standpoint, and what can the government do for their own sectors. Let me start this time with Ankit. Ankit, education, we saw a new education policy, which is a national education policy, which has the right intent. It is a right vision document. It is complete in almost all aspects, was launched. What else do you think the government can do to, one, bring the economy back fast, and second, to be able to deal with the pandemic?
All right, I'll answer your question in parts, Anurag. So, for all the economic stimulus the government has shared till now, I believe the middle class has been left out. There has been a lot of salary loss, cuts, job loss. You have your Manrega, Nairega, Mrega for the lower start of the people. There have been production-linked incentive schemes for the big players, big honchos, and the who's and who's of the stock markets. However, there is not much relief for the middle class, except for the place where banking limit was given. And even there, a lot of the SMEs and MSMEs don't actually had that banking limit as on March. So for them to avail these benefits.
Yeah, because the scheme was such that only if you had a running loan, you would be entitled to. So if you were an entrepreneur who has never taken a loan, possibly is at a disadvantage. So clearly you're saying the government should bring in more measures so that the liquidity is created, and at the SME level, there is more fund disbursal that happens. I think liquidity is what drives demand. It drives creation, and banks clearly have been conservative. I don't think there's any two-way about that. Varun, what do you think the government can do better, both at a macroeconomic level and especially in your sector, which is in the eye of the storm for the last 2 weeks?
Absolutely. So, first though, I'd like to add what you were just saying, that just a lot of the schemes that the government has announced around benefits to small and medium enterprises. So, I'm honestly, what I have seen is that not all of those benefits have been. I would say the MSMEs have actually been able to avail. So, I think there's just a fundamental challenge in making sure that those benefits actually reach the intended objective. The other thing that I also feel is that in this environment, I would say making it easy for foreign direct investment and just loosening out things a little bit there will help a lot. We have a lot of investors in our company that are based abroad and so on. So especially with the whole environment and how it is happening with strained relations with China, also investments on that are also getting impacted. So I think overall, just kind of presenting a view and making the FDI restrictions more loosening them out, I think that will help a lot.
Okay, you're making a case for more investments. So if we have policy consistency and we make proactive efforts to get investors, I think you're saying if we create incentives for either them to relocate to India, whether it is in land assembly, whether it's in labor laws, the cost of capital continues to be very high in India. For example, in Japan, it's 1%. That's the highest cost of capital. In Europe, it is negative rates of interest, it is 0. So clearly, we can do better on those counts. Dr. Bhasin and Dr. Mahajan, what are your inputs on what the government can do better?
See, for our industry, the first thing government can do is start by having a policy. You would be surprised to know that, test was the recommendation, but India till now does not have a policy for regulating the start or the quality of path labs in this country. So the most important response to pandemic was provided by diagnostics, and would always be in case of any health condition. Because once you will know you have the condition, then only you will act. So the diagnostics is a center stone for all health policies. But we don't have a health policy for diagnostics at all in this country. So the first and the foremost thing is have a regulation. Let's start with that. And how do they take it further?
And what
would depend.
Dare I ask, Dr. Bhasin, what are the salient issues that the regulation must address? What are those hanging threads that the regulation needs to address? Sometimes if the frameworks are working and, things are going on well, you don't necessarily need a policy. Only when things are not going well, sometimes you need a policy or as a multiplier.
Let me explain you, sir. Who signs your report and who's responsible for quality on the report is not defined in this country. Okay. So, right now your chauffeur can just start off a path lab and he'll be legally allowed to do that. So that is how much regulation we are lacking. Second point, what is the quality of diagnostics? What are the basic standards which you need to maintain before giving anybody a test report? They don't exist in our country. US has Clinical Laboratory Improvement Act. They have the standards, Europe has. And that is why they had the ability to scale up all of a sudden. In India, the scale up which you have seen is just been out of the goodwill of the industry and of the regulated sector where there were doctors involved and they responded as a call of duty. But if you look at it, only 1% of the sector has responded. We have 100,000 labs in India, only 1,000 came forward for COVID testing. But if we had it as a regulated sector, it could have been mandatory for everybody to respond. And we would have had testing escalation much quicker than what we had today.
Okay.
I think the government has been busy implementing and has kept implementing its policy as a priority rather than making a policy for implementation, if I can put it like that. I don't know.
There was a Clinical Establishment Act passed by the Parliament in 2009 or 10, I think. 10 years later, it is still not applied in 90% of the states.
Okay. We have run out of
Dr.
time.
Mahajan, your final word on what the government can do.
Yeah.
So just very targeted couple of points. The industry has been asking for infrastructure status for a very, very long time. Right, we pay commercial rent, we pay commercial electricity, commercial water. Everything is. It's like a regular retail business. And the second is we really need to up our science and technology spend, sir, somehow. I think one thing the pandemic has brought to the fore is that India's healthcare spend we all know is less, but science and technology spend, R&D spend is.
So that needs to be upped. All right.
For more such videos, subscribe to the NewsX YouTube channel, hit the bell icon.